For the last of our sessions of the 2 days we've had together, I just want to introduce our panel, and I want us to talk about advocacy in the context of politics, and specifically in the context of a general election that I think officially started the night before last at midnight, when Tessa, in fact, stopped being an MP, as she just reminded me, and is now hot favourite to be the Labour candidate for mayor next time. So I'm sure she'll have all of your support. So for just a few introductions, Dame Tessa Jowell needs very little introduction. Was a Labour Party politician till very recently, served in government, was MP for Dulwich, and famously, both in government and afterwards, a huge advocate and reason why London 2012 came to these shores and was such a big success, for which I think the country is forever grateful. For those of us that are huge fans of Tony Blair, maybe few of us left, I still believe in King Tony, Ben Wegg-Prosser served as his Director of Strategic Communications in Downing Street, and he implemented, funnily enough, in the context of all the discussions we've had today about advocacy and technology, the first YouTube channel for any head of government, and he's now a managing partner at Global Counsel, a strategic consulting firm that he founded with Peter Mandelson, that also has an association with WPP and is growing like wildfire, doing very well. Michael has had a very diverse career, from classroom teacher to film actor, before founding BiteTheBallot in 2010, a movement to challenge young people's political apathy, a little bit of which we saw in the video there, with only 1 in 4 18 to 24-year-olds bothering to vote BiteTheBallot to come up with radical ways to add names to the electoral roll, with a big part of that in the context of today being around social and advocacy. So great to have you all here. I think it's interesting that people have been talking today about how advocacy and technology have been changing the way that brands communicate with their customers. Clearly also now, as we come into this election, how political parties communicate is challenged. And in the past, as we again saw in that video, I suppose the iconic part of any political campaign was the poster. And having worked on some of these election campaigns myself, there were some, I guess, norms and accepted wisdoms about how political advertising worked. I remember, in fact, Philip Gould saying to me, there's only 2 types of political advertising, we're great and they're horrible. If you go through the history of political advertising, no one can remember any piece of communication that says we're great, and everyone can remember, as we put in those adverts, they're those that said they're horrible. But the poster and the budgets that people have to support political campaigns have changed. So I guess my first question to all of you is, what do you think in the next 6 weeks will be the defining communications that will help or hinder the main, and not only the main, I suppose, political parties, but all political parties in this campaign? Ben, I'll start with you, actually.
Okay, I think the main communications that will define the election are probably ones that none of us will see, because if you look both at the relative success of the Labour Party in the last general election, and when I mean relative success, the Labour Party significantly outperformed its national poll rating, in the sense that it was able to win seats that it probably shouldn't have won on the basis of its national share, and it was able to stop the Conservatives forming a government when they had so many things in their favour. And that was because of an incredibly effective local campaign, a combination of well-targeted direct mail, well-targeted kind of canvassing and kind of voter contact, and also a sense that incumbency, or understanding how to use incumbency in a way that previous elections probably hadn't been so focused and hadn't understood it to such an extent. And if you look, for example, at Michael Ashcroft, so this Tory peer that's been doing all of this recent, very interesting constituency polling, and one of the things that is different about this election compared to previous elections is that you're now, partly because Michael Ashcroft is obviously slightly bonkers and is spending a fortune on polling, but also because technology allows you to poll on a constituency level in a way that you couldn't have done in the past. What's interesting, the last set of polls that he did in a bunch of principally English marginals was that visibility, particularly around Labour's campaign, was much greater than it was around the Conservatives, partly a function of the age of activists and the fact that Labour's activists are generally younger, more likely to be out on the streets. The Conservative activists are less of them, more focused on kind of direct mail and more traditional forms of advertising. So I think that this sense that there is a campaign that's going on way beyond the national media and on a much more targeted local level, as I say, driven by technology and various different kind of local factors, means that we're unlikely, I think, ever now in our lifetime to see the kind of iconic images that you saw up there repeated, because elections have changed. And finally, the other reason why elections have changed is also because of funding. And there just isn't the money available now in politics that there was in previous elections to fund the kind of ads that you see up there.
Tessa, what do you think?
Well, I'd like just to offer four perhaps slightly disconnected thoughts about this. The first is, and I think this applies as part of an answer to the outcome of this election campaign, that I think the British people are remarkably clever at getting the election result they wanted. And I think that happened last time with no overall, with no majority for any party. I think that the relationship with individual majority parties is still, in a state of flux after what was defined as the crisis of politics, with MPs' expenses and then the collapse of the banks, and the huge kind of reorientation of trust. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second is, and this is, I expect most of you have read Joe Klein's book, Primary Colours. There's a moment towards the middle of the campaign when the president figure is in the pretty ghastly campaign Midwest hotel with the chief of staff figure, and they draw back the curtains in what is the middle of a Saturday afternoon, and somehow, in an election campaign you've gone to a 24-hour time clock, and they look across the road and realise that there's a park and the sun is shining, although they're with the curtains drawn and got the lights on. Anyway, there they observe in the park an elderly couple walking arm in arm, and a father playing football with his two boys. And the president figure says to the chief of staff figure, "It's very easy for us to forget that some people just have lives." And to go to the non-technology of the campaigning that I think is most powerful and most effective, it's going around and knocking on people's doors, not just during the election campaign, but building a relationship over time. And I think that were I still standing for my beloved constituency, I'd have an increased majority in the most difficult part of my constituency, because we had a major victory today, which was the result of a community campaign with literally hundreds of parents who want a new secondary school on the same site as a new health centre, but they don't want a secondary school, a primary school and a health centre, which would mean that none of the new facilities, even the DfE said they would be suboptimal. And we won. And so there will be a secondary school and there will be a a health centre on the site. And that was a community campaign. A community campaign using Twitter and Facebook and blogging, but also just tramping the streets and getting signatures and keeping everyone very well informed. So there was a very clear sense of shared ownership of the campaign. So, of course, social media has changed everything. It's changed both the speed, it's changed some of the virulence of campaigning. It's also challenged all the kind of, the conventions, and this is one of the reasons that David Cameron was caught out yesterday. But to go back to, let's not forget that some people just have lives. I campaigned in one way and another in 10 constituencies in London over the weekend, and the conversation that really sticks out was with a lady who, on a rather promising but unpleasant estate in Hammersmith, who was probably in her late 50s, but was living the disabled life of somebody 20 years older. And she said, when we knocked on her door, and I spent about 15 minutes talking to her, and she said, the thing is, my children, they say I've got to vote UKIP because everything has got to change. But actually UKIP is not a party of change. UKIP is a party of nostalgia. It's a better yesterday, not a better tomorrow. And then she said, and this links with the Olympics, she said, but I really just want to feel that I matter. And so when we talk about, the big sort of and often angry language of political campaigns, there's a woman whose vote is important, who feels so far away from the kind of locus of decision-making and influence, unlike those parents I was talking about in East Dulwich, that she's sort of thinking of voting UKIP because she thinks everything has to change. But actually, the nature of the change she wants is just to feel that she matters and that somebody is listening to her. And part of the great national movement, I think, that the Olympics became during the run-up with the torch relay and so forth. And I talked to a lot of people who were waiting for the torch to arrive patiently and so on and so forth. And that it was extraordinary, the number of times people said, I couldn't not be here because it matters that I am here. So mattering is an incredibly powerful impulse in this process of politics, which is at the margin of most people's lives, but ultimately becomes quite an important lodestar by which they judge whether they're going to vote at all, and to some extent which party they're going to vote for. So I think this advocacy is a combination of all those things. But I also just say, finally, Johnny, that I sort of think that people have already decided what the outcome of this election is going to be. And it's so tight that it's so hard for us to predict. But it goes back to my, it goes back to my first point. And I think in a way, the big and established parties haven't quite caught up with this new, much more kind of emotionally attuned political discourse that people, even people who are not incredibly sophisticated using social media and so forth, want to see.
Michael, does it matter? Because it's interesting if you look at the data on some previous elections. Scotland, people seem to get very engaged with because, or perhaps because, it was something people could find themselves getting passionate about. Younger people with general elections, the statistics say people aren't engaging with it. What's your experience?
Well, I mean, I agree with you. The Scottish result was partly because it was a clear-cut decision. You knew it was going to have a direct impact on your life. It was a yes or a no, rather than physically having to feel or believe in a particular party. And it's amazing to hear what that parent was saying about her children saying vote UKIP, and then trying to break down why that's even the case. And it the crux of it boils down to engagement and education. We've not got a national curriculum fit for purpose under any government, really. We don't engage our youngest citizens to play a role in democracy, because that will eventually lead to change, because more eyes will be looking at the current system, picking it apart. They'll demand greater transparency, and we won't be able to get away with long-winded answers, posters just slagging one another off. We want to know what people are physically going to do, and that's going to come, but the evolution of that is technology. And it's thankfully got the forefront of that is with young people, because they're the best at it. So parties are trying to do it, but Conservatives are spending over 100,000 on Facebook posts. They're not getting the conversion rates that you would do. You know, for National Voter Registration Day, an initiative we created, why we created that, and that wasn't something that the government set to do of yesteryear, long before. We got a conversion rate of 72% of people clicking on a social media post that was either thought-provoking, opinionated, and they click through all 5 pages to physically register to vote. We registered 441,500 people to vote in a week. We spent £200. But why are we doing that? Why are we doing that? Like, we're launching a tool tomorrow to engage our youngest citizens, and it's not partisan, and it's frustrating when you get that from, you know, I only engaged in politics when I was 27, so I'm approaching 5 years now. I wasn't even registered to vote before that. So I've only learnt how to interact with the current government and the opposition parties. And, you know, if you was to ask me who I think is most likely to ensure that some of these sort of key principles of education and engagement, who will take it forward, it probably won't be the current sort of lead party, as most people think. I don't think the Tories really do want to engage our youngest citizens, but to flip that and to then go back to the UKIP scenario, it's about values and ideas. And when you really try and communicate what you believe in to our youngest citizens, you'll see they're not just naturally left-wing, they're far from it. But the scary part is that young people are latching on to this idea of radical change, and we are seeing a rise in xenophobia. We are seeing young people blaming one another rather than looking up. So,
do you think that's perhaps, and Ben, maybe you'll answer this with, do you think that the way in which political parties are configured, you know, historically, the Labour Party, one could argue, was created, which is why it's called the Labour Party, for those people that relied on their housing and their job and their education and their transport. You know, probably belonged to a trade union. You know, that's what the Labour Party was. Those were the interests that the Labour Party were invented to support, and by the same token, the Conservatives, you know, were there to represent probably, you know, industry and those that already had, trying to bias the conversation. But if you're younger and you look at today, people don't sit in the configurations that the parties were existed to, you know, that were formed to represent. And does that mean that they're sort of medium-term, long-term doomed?
Yes, and I think what is interesting, I can't think of another part of our kind of public life, or indeed commercial life, or any part of the kind of broader civil part of kind of society that we exist in, where basically the constructs of the late 19th, early 20th century are still essentially relevant today. And I think, even the church has moved on. And I think it's just kind of weird. And that's for many of the reasons that you described. It's down to the strength of political parties within particular, within local communities. It's down to a relatively strong, if kind of shrinking activist base. It's down to kind of the kind of class-based politics and voting, which is now much less pronounced than it used to be. But I think there's a kind of J-curve or something going on here, where this election will show once again, this election will show in a more pronounced way than ever that end of the 19th century, early 20th kind of construct is coming to an end. That particularly the relationship between power and votes is going to be even less clear than it has been to date. So the fact that you are going to have quite possibly a plurality of votes for the Conservatives, certainly nationwide and definitely in England, the SNP winning by possibly a very long way in Scotland, and the leader of the Labour Party becoming Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, that's kind of weird. But that's probably...
That's your prediction, is it?
I think that'll probably what will happen. And I think that as a function of this relationship between votes and power being unaligned. And I think that when we come to the election after the election, the aftermath will be that this system just has to change. And I think technology will be the means through which political parties will reform. There will have to be probably some form of PR, and you will just see the business model completely changing because the business model is out of sync.
Essentially about legitimacy, because if that scenario plays out as you suggest, you'll have had the majority of people vote for Conservatives and not had a Conservative... you'll have had the majority of people perhaps vote for people other than Labour or Conservative and not have
Indeed.
PR, and you'll have the majority of the major parties having voted for the Conservatives and have a Labour Prime Minister, which at some point must make everybody think, well, how does this electoral system work?
True, absolutely. But the irony is, if we look over the course of the last Parliament, there were two referenda, one on our voting system and one on the future of Scotland, where the result could not have been clearer. We rejected a different form of voting system, and by a vast majority, people voted for Scotland to stay within the UK. And yet the result of the election next month is likely to challenge those two results. Mm-hmm. So it's confusing.
If this is true, by the way, Tessa, should you be running for mayor as Dame Tessa Jowell, not as the Labour Party candidate?
As the Labour Party candidate.
Despite what?
Because if Dame Tessa Jowell doesn't really, or Tessa Jowell rather, doesn't really kind of cut it unless she is supported by the Labour Party, and I think, however, that if you're a city mayor, you are a mayor for the city. And I think that, this goes to, I think, a broader and important point about affinity and membership. I think that where people increasingly are is wanting to be bound into a sort of shared, if you like, alliance of values, rather than necessarily joining a political party. And again, just looking back at the last 3 campaigns in my own constituency, where because we have done so much community campaigning for new schools and health centres and, the things that make a front door difference to people. If I take the last election, I had over 500 volunteers working in my constituency, of whom only 120 were members of the Labour Party. But the others were people who share Labour values and share values of sort of community empowerment and so forth. And I think that more and more that is how, this kind of mix and match in the way people vote is something that we've got to get used to. Boris Johnson last time was elected with 200,000 Labour votes. Ken Livingstone in 2000 was elected with over 100,000 Tory votes. And so people's voting is much less tribal. And I think that that more and more the way you build public confidence is a willingness to represent on issues beyond tribal boundaries. It is a disgrace, actually, if we don't go into this election with a broad consensus about how any party that aspires to form a government is going to enable the increasing number of very frail elderly people to live and die in their own homes. That in a sense is not a kind of tribal issue.
Mm-hmm.
There may be aspects of how it's funded and so forth, but you can have a central commitment to that, and you can probably, welfare reform is another. So I think that one of the ways you engage the real people, is by opening up the debate in that way.
Michael, what do you think?
I need you to remind me the question.
Do you think that the colours, the flags, the Labour, Tory inventions, creations that were, are breaking down, and do you think we need to replace them with, if those labels no longer match what people's interests are, should there be new and different labels?
Well, I mean, it's worth pointing out that most people don't even feel as though those labels communicate to them anyway, and they can't tell them apart. And now, is that partly to blame the parties, but also the electorate? If you've not got masses of people registered to vote, and everyone's scrapping for the same votes, it's inevitable that they're going to drift together because they want to win those seats. So if we can get everybody registered to vote, and the people play their role in communicating actively what they care about, then we might see the parties actually start to communicate their ideologies and values a little bit more. This is us.
What do you say to people to get them to register to vote? What sort of things?
Well, the benefits of registering to vote is quite important, I think, for our younger citizens. So to ensure we've got a representative jury service, to put them at the forefront of their credit rating, to make sure they're in charge of their own identity. That all starts with the electoral roll. And then it's the gateway to play an active role in democracy. It's just not one cross. It's communicating, using the channels of communication with local, national, global issues, but then driving forward the new ones. We do need this. Do
you think that should start younger?
Oh, definitely.
So in Scotland, for example, discussion about 16-year-olds, is that something that you think we should be doing here?
Oh, before that, there should be key activities in primary schools that privileged kids get everywhere. So the ability to debate, challenge common misconceptions, critically think, so that they're prepared to have these conversations and can respect one another's right to be different, but they're going to play an active role. And dare I say, wouldn't it be beautiful if all of them then thought, wow, I'm 16, I'm registering to vote, and treat it like a rite of passage? But we don't. We get comms. These youngsters get communication through their door that says, register to vote or there's a £1,000 fine. Your credit rating might be affected. There's no desire to inspire anybody. And that's because there's no imagination in politics with the old guard. It needs these newfound channels of communication and new thought processes to come to it, because people care about how they're going to live together. And change is inevitable. It's just how much resistance there will be, because the biggest people that lose if we have change is the current people that enjoy life as it is. That's not right or left wing at all. That's just fact.
And Ben, can I just ask you, that you said earlier that you thought that already, and I wondered, or just challenged this, whether that you were crediting the Labour Party last time round and now with a greater level of sort of digital and targeted sophistication than it's actually employing. That the reason we're not seeing, okay, partly because of budgets, but the reasons that we won't be seeing the big poster campaigns, etc., is because there's very clever, understand Ashford. Is that really the case?
No,
is that really what's going on?
I was saying that the Labour Party have prioritised the most unsophisticated form of communication possible, which is called leaflets and direct mail. And they've done that out of necessity, not out of some clever plan. But if you look at what happened at the last election, that definitely paid off. They've also been able to motivate a cohort of activists more effectively than the Tories, basically, principally out of age. So I don't know, I think what both of the parties are doing in terms of digital communications is pretty kind of uninspiring.
Yeah.
But I think that's because it's actually quite difficult if this is essentially a binary choice. If you are to communicate to incredibly sophisticated consumers who are in any other given kind of product market can acquire any number of different brands, and you're saying it's either one or the other, I think it is very difficult to translate.
Do you see, with a week to go in this campaign, given the the debate used to be 2001, for example, when Hague didn't really have much of a chance, even coming close to the election of getting anywhere. There was a discussion in the Labour Party that says, we shouldn't do negative advertising because that doesn't make us look very becoming, and we're going to win anyway. And then one panic poll, and up goes Hague with Thatcher's hair on.
And you put a wig on Mrs. Thatcher's hair.
Yeah.
On William Hague's.
He's never forgotten it.
Is that?
Well, Johnny tells the story most weeks.
Surely that's going to happen. Surely that's going to happen again. With a week to go, aren't we going to see a Bullingdon Club image or a similarly nasty thing happen to Ed?
Yeah, probably.
You don't think it'll be defining in the way that it used to be? Tessa, what do you think?
I don't know.
Tessa, what do you think? Do you think that it'll happen? Or?
I think there will, because I think it's it's kind of reflexive behaviour. I mean, I don't like it, but it's effective, and so you do it. It's a bit like kind of drinking coffee too late at night. It's so I think there will be some pretty brutal last minute advertising. Yeah, I do.
Is it really that effective? I mean, if you look, we've never really had a big turnout of younger voters, so they're definitely turned off. And how much, if you guys as MPs really didn't like it, how much sway have you got to say, look, I'm the one who has to take the brunt of this on the doorstep? Right?
Well, I would love there to be better evidence about the ineffectiveness of negative campaigning, but the evidence from a whole range of campaigns is that it is an effective way of both galvanising and motivating electors at the end. I mean, I think one of the things that will be interesting this time is whether people will vote out of fear. And that's that's a narrative that can break actually both ways. I think, but maybe I'm a bit deluded about this. I feel more optimistic about the engagement of young people.
So do I. I've been doing it for 5 years.
No, I know exactly. Well, I try to do the same myself in my own constituency, but also. I did a thing at a girls' school in Enfield a couple of weeks ago, and it was absolutely. I mean, it was so impressive how much these young women knew, and secondly that they were all registered to vote, and actually thought it was kind of extraordinary that anybody thought they wouldn't be. I'm doing some work on stop and search at the moment, and the willingness of young people to come forward with their experiences, but also specific proposals, not as victims, but because they want to be agents of change. And I sometimes wonder whether we don't just talk young people's engagement down by going on about their apathy, because I don't actually think that engaged in a way that is actually, as you just described, makes a difference to them, makes them the agents of change. Young people are apathetic at all.
I don't believe in apathy, actually, unless you've given everyone everything there is to know and they can make an informed decision, then they can't be labelled as apathetic. But, the stats, when you say the stats about negative campaigning speak for themselves, the stats about young people speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Only half are registered, and that's because it's not on the national curriculum. There's not enough focus to do it, and that needs to change.
Yeah, no, that's a very simple change.
Let me throw this open to any questions. We've got a microphone.
I just want to pick up on that point about apathy. Is it not actually that it's just bloody inconvenient, right? It's inconvenient to vote, actually. It's not set up to be a modern way of people registering their voices. So the way that you used social channels to outreach and get people to register, brilliant. But actually physically going in person to register your vote, surely that went out in the 20th century. Surely there has to be a better way to vote.
Well, I mean, you know,
Instagram likes.
We experimented. You know, I mean, postal vote. Getting a postal vote is very easy, and that's. I mean,
People don't use the post.
now listen. I think I think I'm making all this up. The answer is, first of all, postal voting is quite easy. Second, we did all these trials about voting at different times, and they weren't particularly successful. Can you have online voting? I think probably in 5 years or.
Why 5 years? The 21st century.
Well, I know it's the 21st century, but you know. Well, there'll be another election in 5 years' time. Well, you've just got to make sure it's secure, and you know, look at the scale of election fraud. You know, can you have a system which is fraud-proof? You know, of course, it would be more convenient to for people to vote online. Listen. This is an extremely the old-fashioned thing to say. I also think there is something about going to the polling station and putting your vote in the ballot box, which is, you know, we do it and we're all equal. It doesn't matter who we are in this room. We go to the polling station and every vote counts for the same amount. So I think maybe we have different ways. You know, at the moment, the choice is a postal or in person, but maybe over, you know, for the next election, there'll be a wider range of ways in which you can vote, and maybe. I have to do all my tax returns. Exactly. No, I mean, I'm sure you're right. Maybe, you know, but there's no ceremony, I don't think, about voting online. You know, we just want more people to vote. Yeah, no, of course we do. Of course we do. Yeah.
Anne-Marie, did you want to?
Yeah. I think, Michael, I'm Canadian, so I'm learning all about, we had James from the BBC yesterday that came to talk to us. Now I'm super educated to the very beginning of your election. This is exciting. We're going to have an election in Canada in November. I would love to import you if you're interested in coming or expanding, and I'll go talk to you after, because I think youth engagement in politics is absolutely critical. And it's the first time that I hear someone doing something that big about it, and so I want to congratulate you. I think it's amazing what you're doing. I think that advocacy comes from people believing, and I think youth don't vote because they don't believe, and they don't believe because I totally agree that our discourse, the way that we engage them, are still topics that are completely irrelevant to them. So I don't think that politicians adapted and I shouldn't generalize, but I would say most of them don't speak to be pertinent. They don't speak to points that are relevant to youth. You talked about engagement. If you had a choice and you could write this election, what would be the topics that you think would be, you know, engaging to youth in the UK? Like, what would those topics be?
Well, there'd be most of the same topics that we all care about. You know, where if I want to move out, have I got the opportunities to do so? Have I got pathways for the rest of my life? Does the future look good for me in this country, jobs-wise? You know, I just think most of the topics that most of us care about, but it just needs to, sadly, for now, remove the word politics, focus on the issue, and then show them the impact that they can make by playing a role. There's 5.6 million potential young voters, and you never really get clear data in this country, because it's very nice to sort of, well, that works in this way and that works in this way. You just need it clear as day. But going from some polls that apparently the youth vote could determine 200 MP seats if they turned out. So you are fighting up against it. We should definitely be able to vote online. They do it in Estonia. It does work here. You can fall in love. You can do pretty much anything online. But again, it's that resilience to, you're giving away a little bit of, it doesn't need to take away that luxury of going to the polls. It need not replace it. It can just be done side by side. But we will get there. The best MP Labour has ever had, and I don't know many of them, it was Tony Benn. And he said, if you want change, you don't go to the top, you go to the people. And that's where we are. We're at the people. And it's going to take time, but it's a beautiful ethos to leave with a generation of young people that you might not even see these changes, but do you just want to like and lumber it and take it as it is, or do you want to be part of something non-violent, but just pick this apart and do it your way and create a democracy fit for purpose? And they will.
This is another question for you, Michael. What would be a positive result for you and your young voters in May? Or let's say the most positive result?
Well, I did say a little while ago the biggest turnout ever, which would be 72%. I'm now sort of thinking, it's looking a bit tough because changes to the electoral system. Although I think it's good that you can register to vote online, we didn't tell anybody about it. There's still the Electoral Commission spends about £27 million a year, and the adverts are terrible. They don't really reach out. It's not good enough. But there's no one to go to hold anybody to account. The civil service they've squandered £14.2 million to engage young people and marginalised groups. Where is that gone? I could have a percentage of that money. I would get everybody registered. So then you start to ask yourself, is the will really there? So for me, it's an increase in the last election, just so we can show that, all right, you've done better than last time. But then if you use the actual figures, it was only a quarter of them that voted, because 56% are registered, and of the registered electorate, 44% turned out. So people like to paint this picture, it's not that bleak. 44% of young people voted. No, half were registered, and 44% of those turned out. So if we can beat that, then you can start to lay the foundation of what does it look like over the next 5 years. And hopefully, if they do feel as though their values and stuff don't connect, they start to look inwardly about themselves being part of it.
Sorry, in terms of actual result, who in number 10 would bring about the most fundamental change to the whole voting and political system, do you think?
I don't know. I really don't, because, although Ben said that we had the referendum, it was rushed through on the voting system. It was rushed through. The literature was horrendous. Most young people were thinking, I don't even know what they are. So they opted out of participating. So you just need a little bit more transparency. I've only worked with Labour in opposition. They're definitely saying a lot of the right things. But then I also wish the Tories would try and understand that if their values and aspirations are really what they say on paper, they should give our youngest citizens a chance to be part of that and not just ignore them. Will it be different when Linton goes home? Hopefully, because Dave gets told exactly what he can and can't do by Linton Crosby. That's embarrassing as well. We'll just see. I hope that if someone comes in and says, let's get a few things in place to just, rather than prevention, let's cure it. Engage our youngest early and just let it flourish bit by bit.
Can I ask you, Ben, do you foresee, as a result of this next election, that we will end up with PR at some point in the next 5 years?
I think that if the Conservatives, as I said, get the plurality of votes and are clearly and don't form a government, then that will be a big moment, because to date the Conservatives have always argued against PR because they've always focused on the constituency link between voters and members of Parliament. I think that some form of regional top-up would be the most likely approach, which was explicitly ruled out. The last, as Michael says, the last referendum on AV was kind of sort of pretty weird for lots of different reasons. So I think, yes, some form of regional top-up with a more proportional system, with crucially the Conservatives having previously been kind of winners within the system becoming losers.
I'll take one last question.
In order to be an MP, it's quite hard in this country. Having tried to become a local councillor, it's very, very hard unless you're on the inside. Do you think, actually, you shouldn't be able to become an MP unless you've actually had a job?
Yes. And one of the problems that we have in our political class at the moment is that if you think of the four most important people in British politics, or five if you include Nick Clegg, they've all basically worked in the same postcode all of their lives, apart from the time when Nick Clegg was in Brussels. They all went to very similar schools, they all went to very similar universities, and none of them have ever been economically active within society. And that ain't a good thing. But they're also, all of them, five of them, they're all men as well. They're all very clever, intelligent people who were politically ambitious, and they worked out the way to pursue their political ambitions was to leave university at the end of July when they were 21, get on the tube to Westminster and basically never leave. And until that changes, until political parties are more comfortable with and are more open to selecting beyond their kind of core, either kind of elite or activist base, we'll never be able to crack that.
I agree with that. I think that but I think if you've done something before, if you've worked before, first of all, you know, I worked for 20 years before I became an MP, and I could not have done a lot of what I've done had I not got that previous experience to draw on. But I think also, if you've done something before, you have a very clear view about why you want to be a Member of Parliament, what you want to change, and probably you've got a pretty good idea about how you want to change it. Now, I think the problem with my view is that it could cut out young people from going into Parliament. But I think there are people, I think there are people who entered Parliament when they were very, very young, you know, in their 20s. And I think they would have, you know, in every possible way, their contribution would be more powerful had they, you know, been more activists, been involved in cause-related politics before going to Westminster.
I think I better leave it there in the interest of time. Thank you very much, all three of you. That was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Tessa.